Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are incredibly happy to be here this morning in Yerevan at the EBRD annual meeting and to talk about Egypt. And to talk not just about Egypt, but also Egypt's enormous transitions to a renewable superpower and a champion for climate ambition and change. And also how we're going to get there. And so we're going to talk about country platforms and how all the stakeholders are important to achieve this journey and what we can all learn from it. So I'm Heike Harmgart. I'm the Managing Director for the Eastern and Southern Mediterranean region. I actually live in Egypt. I'm based in Cairo, so there's a lot of positive personal attachment to the country, but also to really accompany as EBRD this enormous journey. And I think I couldn't think of a better and more qualified panel to discuss these different aspects of Egypt's country platforms and also the climate ambitions and transitions to utilize the enormous sun that shines and the wind energy that we do see in the country. So I'm joined here on stage, and I'm incredibly happy and privileged to sit next to Dr. Rania Al-Mashat, who is not only the Minister of International Cooperation, the Governor of Egypt at the EBRD. I think you're chairing also the Board of Governors this year, so super busy, so we're incredibly happy to have you. Minister Rania, of course, is not only the Minister of International Cooperation, but has a history of Minister of Tourism, working at the sub-governor of the Egyptian Central Bank. So she is an expert in bringing people together in particular, and she will tell us more how this worked for the country platform and really utilizing the different strengths of partnerships. And so I'm incredibly happy to have you here. Next to Dr. Rania, we have Torbjörn Caesar, the chairman of Actis, a global investor who wants to make sustainable champions all over, not just Egypt, but also in Egypt, and has been investing in the country's renewable journey for many years. But we also are keen to hear your international and global perspective and what global investors look at, what they think the challenges are, the opportunities, and how we can sort of together overcome some of those. And next to Torbjörn, we have our very own Boyd-Carpenter, who is the Managing Director for Climate Strategy and Delivery, but in a previous life actually worked on the energy transition on the Ben Barn project in the south of Egypt, so also has a very personal, positive commitment and love affair with the country, but also hands-on experience in actually structuring some of these early renewables that we did, but also, of course, now brings in the expertise from what we're doing on climate change across all of the EBRD's country of operation. Then on screen, we see the co-chairman and CEO of Hassan Alam, Amr Alam. So Amr, we're so happy to see you on screen. Of course, we wish you could see the sunshine here in Yerevan, but we're very happy to have you. And it's really, Amr is, of course, since 2010, really the champion of changing also a large construction company into regional, Middle Eastern, African infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure champion. And so it's also interesting to learn from your journey in terms of the expansion and deepening of your business activities in the sustainability area, supporting, of course, with your many investments in and construction projects in Egypt, but also how Egypt can become a hub for the wider region, for the North Africa region, but also the whole African continent. So I'm very happy to have you, and I hope you can hear us well.
I can.
So, brilliant. Thank you so much. So first of all, to really get into the topic of also what we can achieve together with country platforms and partnerships, we have a short video that we want to share with you to also illuminate a little bit about the specific country platform, the Nexus for Water, Food and Energy, and the Minister will explain a lot more also about the genius of the name in addition to the genius of the outcome and the implementation. But let's have the video.
شغال في محطة كهرباء وسط الدلتا بصيانة التربينات. نقلت لصيانة الأذانات، كنت شغال براد والحمد لله اتعلمت شغل اللحام.
We believe we will be able to supply power to the grid by 2025, and we are working on the construction. There is very well progress on the ground, and we believe we will be more than 50% complete next year.
We have 77,000 of these steel posts, which is the foundation of a solar PV project. Over this, we are going to mount the PV solar module to generate 650,000 megawatt hour of green energy generation.
Excellent. So I hope you got a glimpse of what we're going to talk a little bit about today, about really country-led platforms of partnerships achieving energy transition. And I think it's actually sort of to, of course, Dr. Rania's testament. She said, no, let's start with the private sector. Let's not start with the government explaining what the government is contributing and doing, but let's start with the private sector, how they see the opportunities that such a platform creates. So, and so I'll follow her advice, and I think this is actually just shows really how we're really putting all of these views into making sure that we have a very dynamic and agile platform that really allows the private sector to take more risk, to invest more in countries such as Egypt. So if it's okay, I'm going to start with you, Torbjörn. Sure. Just sort of tell us a little bit from an international investor perspective. So you invest in many, many markets. Yeah. And so you see, of course, the fundamentals, but you also see the policy commitment. You see now how in a country platform, different actors are coming together. So how do you perceive the sort of investment opportunities? How would that influence your investment appetite if stakeholders come together? And sort of what are the components that you're particularly looking at and are keen from a private global investor perspective?
Great, thank you. So it's wonderful to be here in the panel. So I also have some connectivity to Egypt on a personal level, having started my career as a young engineer back in 1987. Shockingly many years back now, in Egypt, building a power plant there. So it feels very connected to me personally as well. If you're looking at Actis as an organization, so we have invested in well over 50 countries. We have some sort of maybe a distant cousins to EBRD in some ways. We are the privatization of CDC, the Commonwealth Development Corporation of the UK government. But we've been privatized now for 22 years. And so, as I said, we invested in about 50 countries, more than that. We invest about $2 billion of equity every year. And if you add, say, the debt that we then attract into those projects, there's another 2, 3, 4 billion. There's quite a significant amount of money that we invest in these markets, Global South in general. And we are both in energy transition, digital transformation, and supply chain reallocation. But we're talking here now more about the energy side. And if you're looking at then the energy side, across the markets that we're investing, what is then required to attract someone like us to invest? And I think the first thing to note is that we pick the best deals on a global basis. So if we do a deal in Egypt, it is because that's the best deal to do in that point in time. We do that instead of another deal in Brazil or in India or in China or in Japan. So it's a global allocation of capital. And it may sound a bit like motherhood and apple pie in many ways, these criteria, but I think the political willingness, I think, is one of the most important one. And I think the political willingness is both from the host country and also from the DFI community, but making sure, therefore, that you have an open understanding to what it takes to get the private sector to come in, the regulatory framework around that, transparency, predictability, and the likes. And I think that if you see that predictability is there, from a political point of view, through various governments, so it's not just there today and gone tomorrow, that is something that we're looking at. That's one of the key criteria for us in these markets. And I also think, I just want to say also that it's important to think about it also from, should we say, an EBRD or DFI and World Bank point of view. And I have an example here. That is that we did one of the first private power projects in Egypt, also Sidi Krir, 680 megawatts, a gas-fired power generation facility. And for me, it was wonderful to come back to Egypt, many years back later to do that project. And we did that, and we set it up, and we have doubled the capacity in terms of off-take from the grid point of view, and we also have double capacity from a cooling point of view. So the plan was to build 2 times 680. But I guess at that point in time, I don't know if they're brothers or sisters to you, but European Investment Bank then decided to, the sisters, they decided to give an aid loan to the Electricity Authority of Egypt at that point in time, who then thought, why do we need the private sector when we get, subsidized money from EIB? So I think, you need to have also that side working, making sure, therefore, that the private sector is welcome, not just today, but also tomorrow. So I think that's really one of the key things that we are looking at when we invest in different markets. The second is the regulatory framework, and making sure that we really can understand and see that there is an independent regulator, not political, an independent regulator, and that you have transparency. So you can really understand what is going to happen with your project, the tariffs, and how you mitigate around that. And I can't stress that enough. That is just absolutely crucial. And making sure that you've seen that it's working over time, so it's not just set up, but it actually has been working over a long period of time. The third element that we're looking at is subsidies. We do not like subsidies. We want to be in sectors and investments in countries where you have cost-reflective tariffs, so actually the end consumers are paying what it actually costs to buy the service, electricity in this case. I think subsidies can always mess up things in many ways. So those are really the 3 key areas that we are looking at specifically from a global basis. If you look at Egypt, I think Egypt has some challenges right now from a fiscal point of view. But I think and hope that we can help out there. We're looking at taking part in the privatization to actually acquire an asset there. And I think initiatives like that is also a way of enhancing the cooperation between the private sector and the public sector. So I think I've stopped my initial remarks there.
Thank you so much, Torbjörn. That's very, very good sort of highlighting the different elements that also have to come together when you make these global investment decisions, deciding between your children sort of where to invest at this moment in time and what are the key drivers. And you also mentioned, for example, of course, the regulatory element, so that you look at it from a global perspective. But actually, I want to come now to Amr, because, of course, you're much closer to at least the Egyptian, of course, regulatory sector. You understand the market. It's your home base. You, of course, see it in comparison to many other markets that you are looking at. But maybe I also want to drill with you, because you're very active now also around renewables, and renewables also driving potentially the future for green hydrogen. So maybe how do you perceive the investment and risk factors that made you decide to be part of the private sector investments in renewables, but also surrounding renewables and the green supply chain? So what, as a sort of an Egyptian regional and global investor, are the key factors for you investing in the green transition in Egypt?
Thank you, Heike, and good morning to everyone, and sorry I couldn't be there personally. I think Egypt is in a very unique situation. First, I'm an optimist, so I'll look at the opportunity. I think there are 3 key factors for Egypt that differentiate it from anywhere else in the world, I guess. The geographic location. I think Egypt is in close proximity to one of the largest potential consumers of green energy, that being Europe. So that puts us at an advantage to other geographies. Second of all is the wind resource and the solar resource that we have as a country. We have plenty of wind, we have plenty of sun, sometimes a bit more than what we need. But in general, the resources in Egypt are ideal for producing renewable energy at decent yields. Third is the willingness, like Tobias just said, from the Egyptian government to implement an aggressive rollout of renewables in short term and medium term. I think we have 42% of our energy generation from green resources by 2030 is required by the Egyptian government, and that is quite an aggressive target to achieve. And so basically, in my mind, the stars have aligned for Egypt in terms of building a case as to whether or not opportunity exists. Next come the risks, of course, and we can sit and hear and discuss risks until tomorrow, but I think I can summarize them, in my point of view, in 3 key elements. First, I think the timely execution of the projects. We've heard a lot about announcements about a lot of projects, and capital required to achieve these targets are astronomical. However, there is only a fraction of that money that is available to be deployed, and quite honestly, this capital is not very patient. So if the opportunity exists on paper but takes forever to materialize into reality, I think that is an issue. And I think the government stakeholders need to move much faster to implement these targets and attract the capital that's required to fund such an ambitious plan. And again, there needs to be assignable, bankable PPAs, proper allocation of land. We need to cut through the red tape as quick as possible to get these projects up and running. The second risk, in my mind, is the evacuation capacity. I think there is a big question mark as to whether or not the current grid capacity would allow for the evacuation of the announced projects. And so I think as developers, we need to see and have visibility on how this rollout of the evacuation capacity will happen and the costs associated with it, cost-sharing agreements and such. So this is also very key for government to highlight to developers at the current stage. Third and final risk, in my opinion, is financing. As was just discussed, Egypt is turning the corner in a very challenging economic context, with foreign currency availability being quite an issue. However, I see we've actually turned the corner. There is a very big opportunity for this, for the economy to solidify. And I think for the government to give comfort on the currency regime, the stability of the currency regime, and the overall long-term economic policy to be visible to investors, again, this will unlock a lot of additional private investment.
Thank you, Amr. And I think both you and Torbjörn really also highlighted the roles of financing, but also the role of the roles that MDBs can play and over and above financing and helping with some of the regulatory environments that are identified both as key risks by both of you. So let me turn over to Harry to really understand a little bit where multilateral development banks such as the EBRD can help in this energy transition and can help give confidence to investors, from global investors but also domestic investors, and help also the Egyptian government on some of the risks that were identified to mitigate them. And so maybe if you can elaborate a little bit around this piece of the puzzle and what could we do better as EBRD, and what's the lesson learned in sort of this ambitious endeavor of helping Egypt be even more ambitious. We saw Egypt's updated NDCs. What can we do, and what can we do both from an investor and policy perspective? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Heike, and good morning, as you said. And Dr. Rania was saying as well that there's a sort of personal investment in Egypt here. I'm still, desperately hoping to find an excuse to move and live in Egypt, and even, despite the fact that the sun would be a bit of a challenge for me, but anyway. So it's quite appropriate that I speak now, but sort of after the private sector and before Dr. Rania, because that's exactly the role that EBRD is trying to play, and we sit at that nexus between public and private sector. I often describe our business model as sort of tactically private and strategically public, because on the one hand, what we're trying to do is we're trying to do deals, we're trying to do them like a banker, we're trying to be agile, be quick, and we're also trying to make a good return on our capital. But of course, our fundamental reason for being here is to serve our shareholders. Our shareholders are countries, and above all, our countries of operation. So our overarching goal is to sort of Citibank or whatever. But actually, the real investors you really care about are people like Torbjörn and Amr, because these are the people who will come and put their equity to work. They're also people who will put money into development, that hard, risky, difficult bit, where you have to go and you have to find the right site and you have to talk to the local villages, you have to talk to the grid company and understand. So those are the two most important parties. And the bit that EBRD is trying to do is trying to sort of work out what's missing between those two. Where is the sort of gap in resource or gap in understanding, and try to fill that in. And as I say, I think the capacity to work with public and private has been caught at that. I'll give you a very practical example. You mentioned Benban. Benban was this big solar project, in many ways, unlocked the model for delivering private investment in renewables in Egypt. Maybe didn't turn the key quite as fast as we hoped, but still, the key turned. How did that start? Well, it started because we EBRD were lending to the public sector, and I was a junior banker, even more junior than I currently am, doing that deal. And I had, we was working with a very serious engineer in the Egyptian electricity holding company, and I said to him, do you mind telling me a bit more about your private sector ambitions? He said, well, I'm not really involved in that, but I can introduce you to the person. And he walked me down the corridor and opened the door and into the woman who ran the private sector and said, here's Harry, you can talk to him because he's lending us money. And it really was that key, that the ability to understand the public sector and to articulate to internalize the public sector's concerns, but also to be able to articulate the private sector concerns. Because many of the conversations we had, we would sit with government and we'd say that we think you need to recalibrate the structure in this way. Why? Because I have to sell this to a credit committee. I have to go back to the clients and like Torbjörn or people like Torbjörn or Amr and say, this I think is bankable. I think this is investable for you. So that's the critical role we played. What have we learned from this? I think we've learned that the model works. And we know that the model works from across the world. If you create the right structure, private investment flows, and it flows economically. It flows at, you get very cheap electricity, and you get the projects delivered. So we know that the model works. What have we not done well? What can we do better? Starting with EBRD, but I think also for all parties, is we struggle to move from the project by project mentality to the system. And we're still in the mindset where we're pleased when we do a 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt, 300 megawatt project. But you look at the numbers. We have to stop talking about megawatts. We have to talk about gigawatts. And we can only do that if we think about a system. And I think that, that's when NWEFI has come in. NWEFI was an attempt to really say, let's not worry. Let's not look at, how do we get one more project done or two more projects done. Let's create an overarching vision and an overarching goal, and then trust that the model that has been created will deliver that goal. But that, for us, really is a challenge for all of us, is how do you start thinking about changing the whole system and moving the whole framework rather than just going, project by project. And we're not there yet.
Thank you, Harry. And I think that's a perfect segue also to Dr. Rania, because, of course, that is sort of some of the initial motivation of creating this platform was to move from the project to project to a system to really unleash the full potential. So maybe, Dr. Rania, if you can just elaborate a little bit about the NWEFI idea and how it came about, and sort of where do you see this fitting in and enabling this linkage between all the partners and the resulting acceleration of Egypt's green ambitions. So, and also how you got the name.
Well, thank you so much, Heike. And I was very keen that we hear from everybody and then end with the government. But let me say that from our experience with all MDBs and all the development partners, there was a very important opportunity. Climate action is becoming a priority for countries. It's becoming a priority for MDBs. And there's always this excuse that there are not enough bankable projects to be able to lend to. Plus, there's a lot of, you hear about a grant here and a grant there and different types of initiatives by different institutions to push and accelerate climate action in different countries. So we felt that there was a very important opportunity to be able to tap on that, but building on the very good history that we have with EBRD, that we have with EIB, that we have with African Development Bank, and many others who have been working in Egypt for some time. Let me focus on the energy pillar of NWEFI, because you, with IFC and many others, were in Egypt in 2014, 2015, when BIMBAN was taking place. The structural reform that the government did at the time was based on probably the discussions Harry had with many of his counterparts in Ministry of Electricity and others, and the call from the private sector for this feed-in tariff, which would unlock a very important sector which was not there before 2015. So our discussion on climate action started then. It wasn't as formalized as it is after Glasgow. I think Glasgow COP26 was a turning point for all of us, because the narrative around climate conferences became one where all of us need to work together, and there's financing for the private sector. And country platforms started with the just energy transition platforms that the G7 pushed out for South Africa, which uses coal. So there was a we're going to help one of the most polluting industries to stop that by giving concessional finance. So this is where our idea of our own country platform came into place. As Harry mentioned, it's not a project by project, but it's 10 gigawatts. So it's trying to move from or generating 10 gigawatts of renewable energy. Of course, this is over time. It's not immediate. And the idea is that the private sector needs to be the leader there. And we actually already signed very important projects already within the NWAFI umbrella, with EBRD being a key financer along with others. So the platform itself is a way to bring all of you together. I think tomorrow we're in a session where we talk about MDBs working together. And I always say that it depends on the country to try and create that ability for EBRD to partner with MDBs, but also commercial banks. Because what you provide is a de-risking component through also the grants that we might get from EU and so forth. So I think that where we came in all of this, and given my use of acronyms always, is through two C's: our commitment, and the commitment was shown in bringing forward the NDCs. Instead of 42% of renewable energy by 2035, it's by 2030, and this was updated, as was shown in the video, in June 23 as part of a concessional financing from Germany and from the EU and from EBRD. And we also have a debt swap related to the reskilling that we saw in the video. So we try to bring in several elements which are being discussed in the international fora around climate action. So commitment. The government is very committed to moving forward. Amr mentioned some of the challenges related to the grid, and this is something that we're discussing with EBRD and others. How can we, the pace by which the renewables were generated might have outpaced the pace by which the grid is invested in, and this is again an opportunity to move forward. The second is clarity with respect to the projects, and that's where all of you were there to basically say that these are projects within this programmatic approach that we can invest in or finance. And then the third is the credibility we have with all of you. EBRD in Egypt has been there for a long time, and there has been implementation in everything that we work on together. Maybe given the different shocks, it takes a little bit more time than on certain aspects than others, but there's a lot of credibility in how we are working with all of you. I'll put on my, when you were reading where I worked before, you missed that I worked at the IMF for 7 years, so let me put that hat on. Macroeconomic stability is a necessary condition to be able to move forward with development projects and with structural reforms. So the very significant adjustment on the macro side that happened over the past 2 months, two or so months, is supposed to pave the way for more anchored expectations and a better functioning foreign exchange market, which is very, very important for all the investors who are sitting with us and trying to invest in the country. I'll stop there, but I just want to say that country platforms have to be country-led. EBRD and others have been doing fundamental work in countries, because you're not just there for a short project, but you're there for a longer-term partnership, and it's through the diagnostics on sectors, through the dialogue you have with the private sector, that we are able as a government to internalize all of this and take policy actions which can expedite investments going forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rania. And I think, a lot of the elements that you highlighted are very common between the private sector and the government, namely also the predictability, but also the long-term commitment, the credibility of the government, so to create this trust, but then also really to see from and that's sort of the NWAFI sort of committing from pledges to implementation, really that we saw on sort of the evolution in the first year of the country platforms implementation, from Sharm el-Sheikh, when Egypt hosted the COP, to now Dubai hosting the COP, really seeing that all of these elements both on the sort of decommissioning, but also on designing critical grid investment projects and enabling more renewables, have already progressed. And I think this is also important that from sort of this commitment and the announcement that you see the implementation. It's just 1 year, but there's already progress on all of these elements. And so that maybe is sort of another lead up to a question to the private sector, where, you know, we're saying this is an area where we want to move from project to project to a big sustainable. We're already talking in this on the Nuafi energy pillar. We're talking about 10 gigawatt. We're not talking about the small megawatt sort of. But so from you, from as a global perspective, so you're saying every year you look at the best opportunity. But what would help you in terms of a systemic approach to maybe scale up the individual one, or sort of, is that something you could see through this mechanism to be really enabling you, and how do you see the interplay?
Thank you. No, I think it's absolutely crucial to move to some sort of a platform or a system, as we talked about here. And take the example that you mentioned, South Africa. You know, when the World Bank, together with the South African government, agreed then how to finance, shall we say, the last six-pack coal project, and through that then starting the whole renewable reform there. And look at all the rounds there. It's been incredibly successful, and we have been built many actually gigawatts there in that market because of that. Other examples is India, Brazil. So if you look at India, set up like 500 gigawatt and coming up and doing that. But again, through a very clear structure, a transparent system, backed by the government, they have attracted lots and lots and lots of investors and capital in that very transparent one. Brazil, the same. Actually, they started earlier, and the same there. So we've been building many gigawatts in both Brazil and in India. So if you take that as an example and thinking about how that can be applied here, I think you're coming back to the same fundamentals, as I said, but not from a product level, but from a system level. Do you have the governmental support and backing for it? And again, both the host government and also the DFI community, who should not scare away capital by aid capital into that equation in a system which is cost reflective and transparent regulatory framework. If you have that in a more systematic platform approach, capital will come. But we have to remember, though, capital, it's a competition for capital. And if you're looking at what what we are doing, we're looking after the money of pension holders. I mean, these are teachers and police officers and civil servants and the likes whose pension money we are investing, and clearly we're investing that to get great return to them. And so it's a competition. The governments compete. Do we want to invest in Egypt, or do we want to invest in Chile, or do we want to go to Mexico or Korea or Japan? Where do we want to invest? So in that world, it is important to understand that that is how a private investor sees it, and therefore you need to be attractive. And through those three parameters that you had there.
No, thank you very much. And maybe also one element that we saw in the video, but I think, also Harry can elaborate a little bit more, is sort of, where is the capital best used in what kind of format? Because, of course, this platform brings together a number of elements. And I think you're talking about, of course, the private sector opportunities in the renewal space, and that, should be cost reflective and competitive. And I think from an EBRD heart, of course, we couldn't agree more on this. But then, of course, in the system approach, then, there are also other parts of capital that are needed in order to make it work as a system. And so maybe, Harry, if you look at a little bit of the different elements also on the financing side that could actually enable and enhance each other in the platform.
Thanks. Actually, before I'm even going to abuse the opportunity and say what I think it needs to be done and what's crucial is, we often, so long as you don't turn me off. No, I mean, what we often say to countries is that you set your long-term goal, make it big and ambitious, but then also set a schedule. Say we're going to deliver this many gigawatts in this year, this many in the next year, this many in the next year. And that's partly what the NDC commitment of Egypt does. I mean, if you translate the NDC commitment from Egypt into real year-by-year numbers, it comes to about 4 gigawatts a year. And if you can put some flesh on that and show this is credible, this is going to happen, you also you significantly increase investor interest, because you're saying to investors, this is a long-term gigawatt scale market, but you also increase the possibility of supply chain relocation. That's not to say that a whole wind turbine business from start to scratch is going to move to Egypt, but there are many components in that business. And somebody looking and saying, okay, there's 200 megawatts coming next year, fine, I'm just going to import everything. But someone saying there's a 10 gigawatt industry here, Okay, now it's interesting to me to set up a factory or to start thinking about, tower manufacture or something like that. So one of our strongest recommendations to all governments is set a long-term ambition and then specify how you're going to deliver that in the next few years, because that gives you the best chance of the most competitive price, the most investor interest, but also, really importantly, because of the employment and the growth implications, the onshoring of the supply chain for that industry. And then very quickly on where should the capital go? What we think is, when it comes to the renewable sector, we think there is lots of private money that, when the framework is right, will come to the generation projects. What we observe is if you get the framework right, you can get money and get it at competitive, efficient rates. You need public money for the grids, because grids are public assets. And then you need some form of highly concessional capital for the just transition components, because there's no revenue there to repay anything.
No, that was very efficient. And actually, it's a great segue also to a question to a diversified company such as Hassan Alam, because actually, what about the greening of the supply chain and attracting with more predictability on the scale of the ambition over the short term and over the medium term? So how do you see, because you, of course, are active in a number of sectors, the opportunities to attracting more of the green supply chain and green industrial base to Egypt?
I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and the best example for this is what has been done on the ground currently. So as a group, we've already set up an energy platform, and I think, like Dr. Rania said, the credibility that arose with the DFIs because of the NWEFI program allowed us to attract someone like EBRD to join us on this energy platform, focused on Egypt to invest in the renewable space. Alongside the EBRD, we were able to attract as well Meridiam, who is a very large sustainable infrastructure investor. We've secured almost 11 gigawatts of wind projects alongside the global developers as well. So you have a government framework that attracts the DFIs, that attracts the private sector, and this platform is one that delineates the success of this story. This pipeline of projects is quite sizable. We're partnering with global players like Aqua Power on a 1.1 gigawatt project, which we expect to reach financial close by the end of this year. We're partnering with Masdar and Infinity Power on a 10 gigawatt project. Of course, this is a long-term project, so 10 gigawatts won't be immediate, but it'll be over time. We're actually signing the land allocation agreement today. I think it's happening currently. Unfortunately, I'm not there. And we're moving forward with these projects. Jointly with EBRD and Meridiam, we're deploying equity of around $300 million and multiples of that in debt. So the wheel is turning in terms of capital deployment on the back of what NWEFI is providing for investors. And I think it's very important. Once these projects come into play, I think the supply chain will kick in automatically. So you will have a lot of industries, local industries sprouting around these projects, whether it's, of course, the construction industry will flourish. It's already been flourishing in the past 10 years, given the large infrastructure spend the government has undertaken. But I think this is a shift towards more of the private sector investment and where the construction players will get engaged with multinationals and private money. I think there are several industries locally that can also take off, whether it's mass building for wind or many others that can take place under the economies of scale concept that will happen given the sizable investments and projects that we see happening. Again, I want to highlight that it's not only local developers doing that, and I have to highlight that Actis is playing a massive role in giving credibility to the Egyptian market. I see them investing a lot, and I really commend their presence in Egypt. It's really helping the whole environment take shape.
Very good.
Thank you so much. And I think it's good that the sort of, we see really alignment between the international and the local private sector and seeing these opportunities. And thank you, Amo, for sharing also sort of course, the platform that you've created in terms of scaling up also from project to project to enabling these bigger sized investments. And I think you mentioned a number of the supply chain elements, for example, around construction, but also masts. But I think I know that your group is also, of course, active in sort of e-mobility. So I think a lot of the sort of auxiliary industries that are around the green transition have a lot of opportunities to be localized. And I don't know, unfortunately, I came out of the chief economist panel where there was a lot of the challenges, the global challenges on the global risks. And, maybe peace dividends are declining. And I think, of course, this idea of nearshoring and getting sort of diversifying the supply chains is an important global process. And I think Egypt, I think we've started off with the enormously well-located part of the country and the natural advantages that it has in doing that, I think could potentially also help on this green supply chain. And I think that's also one of the components of Nowafi is helping also maybe on the industrial side, so exactly all the opportunities that you were mentioning to materialize. But maybe I think I also want to go a little bit into the nitty-gritty of what made it work and function. And so actually, Dr. Rania, if you allow me, if you can tell me a little bit from your perspective, what are the measures that also the government has taken to ensure the smooth coordination? So what has worked? And because they are also from the government side, of course, you are the champion, and I think you are also for us the key entry point into this. But you needed to also do, you have more partners in the government.
Well, a few things. The coordination, as a ministry, we are responsible for all IFIs and bilaterals except the IMF. So everybody, the whole world is with us. What was very important is that we are very transparent, and we provide a platform where all of you talk to each other. And we were very keen on publishing our progress report on Nowafi. It's on the website, so if everybody wants to see out of the 10 gigawatts what exactly happened, what each type of financing, where did it go, whether it's from a grant component, a debt swap, a concessional loan. And what was very important is to convince everyone of what, and I didn't say this in my earlier remark, but the idea of the just transition means that there needs to be concessional finance to push countries with their climate ambition. So what does just mean? How can we, as a country, across ministries, come very quickly with each other in a way to leverage the resources which are found and the pockets in different institutions to be able to leverage on this concessional part. Also, the word Nowafi, because you asked me about this and I didn't respond, Nowafi in Arabic means fulfilling pledges or fulfilling promises. So we always say, let's Nowafi together, because it's the government, it's the private sectors, it's the MDBs, it's civil society, it's everybody. So everybody needs to be working together, and that's where the name comes in. Finally, country platforms have now become a trend. If you take a look at the MDB statement that came out of COP28, it says very clearly supporting country platforms. If you look at also moving from COP28 to COP29, there's the word doubling down on country platforms. So it's becoming now very, very important that countries prioritize what they want and have an entity designated to bring all the IFIs and these different components of grants and this and that. So we play this role of catalyzing the coordination within government, but also across the IFIs. And again, transparency, being very clear with what has happened over the year, be it from the private sector. We have Abydos, of course, and Monet. These are the two projects under renewable that have taken place from the private sector under Nowafi. And also all the partnerships that Amr mentioned comes on the back of your engagement as an institution with many of them. So EBRD is our lead MDB on the energy pillar. So I want to thank also President Odile for her personal commitment to the energy pillar and everybody who has been working on that with us as a ministry, but also with us and my colleagues in cabinet to be able to push this forward.
Thank you so much. And actually, you know, country platforms as a model, and Egypt sort of leading with a country platform model with Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27, I think is also an important sort of segue. I think, Harry, sort of how do you see this sort of model? Because I think already in COP28, this model was taking hold in some other countries of operation. So how do you see this also as a global trend and bringing, and where are the key... What are also some of the global partners, the donors, the DFIs, telling you what they like about it, and you know why they would want to replicate it or not?
As Dr. Rania mentioned, I mean, this is becoming a very popular topic. If you know, anybody who's in DC for the spring meetings, you know, I sort of felt we should have copyrighted the phrase. But you know, what's the underlying driver? The underlying driver is the gap between the available DFI, MDB, bilateral concessional finance and the need. You know, the investment need in lower middle income countries by 2030 is estimated at 2.4 trillion a year to meet the sustainable development goals. To meet the climate goals. There's more required to meet the SDGs. So there's 2.4 trillion a year compared to a current 600 billion. So there's a 1.8 trillion gap that needs to come. And you can't fill that gap through more concessional finance. It just isn't available. You can't fill that gap by scaling up MDBs. You know, the MDBs don't have that capital. So you have to fill it by increasing the leverage of public money. You have to fill it by saying that by increasing the ratio for which every dollar of public money that goes in generates more dollars of private money. And how do you do that? Well, you just don't do it by doing project by project, as we keep saying. You do it by constructing a platform or a mechanism or whatever you want to call it that integrates the policy reform, the country ambition, the MDB support, the donor support, and then the big number, the private investment. So that's the driver. The driver is meeting a fundamental development need and saying that the only way we do this is by developing mechanisms which will create that catalytic and leverage effect. Sometimes people sort of try to over-theorize a country platform. A country platform is not some highly technical term where things either is or isn't. Essentially, a country platform is when you have those elements together. The country ambition, above all, as Dr. Rania said, has to be country-led. So the country ambition, the reform, the donor support, the MDB involvement, the MDB finance, and then the significant volumes of private investment and private projects. How is it evolving? I mean, it's difficult. NWEFI is moving. NWEFI, I think, is regarded as a success. You always want to go faster. You always want to do more, but it is moving. The JETPs are really, not finding life easy. And that's not just a sort of crude comparison. The JETPs have taken on some really, really difficult challenges. Other country platforms are going. At COP28, we supported North Macedonia in launching their country platform that we call the Just Energy Transition Investment Platform. ADB has announced a country platform of Bangladesh. But I think what matters in terms of generating more interest in this, more commitment to it, more resources to it, is showing the success of the existing models. I think if we can do that, then we'll see more and more countries saying, okay, tell me more, let's see how I do this. And if we don't, then we've got a problem, because that enormous gap between available public money and need for investment will remain.
Thank you, Harry. And I think this enormous gap that you described, and I think then sort of that leads me also to a question to Torbjörn about, you mentioning, you're having pensions money that you need to invest in a patient, but also the return. So I think also, where do you see opportunities for scaling up sort of also some of these big pockets of capital in the pension funds, but what sort of translating this and scaling this up to fill this gap, what needs to happen? And I think you very vividly described, I mean, these are, of course, people who also have long-term return expectations. These are their pensions that you are investing with, but also these funds would need to be channeled into more green transition investments. So how do you see this gap being filled from the private sector? No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, it's clearly so that there's plenty of capital available. I mean, I've been 35 years now in this investment space in mostly power, but in emerging markets, and I've never ever seen a project that is bankable that didn't get financing. Capital is not the issue. The issue is bankable transactions. So it's it's not the capital side, it is the structuring side, I think, in general, to attract that capital. But I think it's also important to think there's not just renewable projects or renewable, you can do a lot of other things. And take two examples here. Grid, both the transmission system and the distribution system. And you mentioned they're state-owned. They don't need to be state-owned. I mean, we have done some very successful privatizations in the distribution space. Uganda, we turn that around and connecting more and more people, taking down losses and growing that dramatically, which we also, by the way, listed on the very large Kampala stock market. But also therefore having some sort of a part to do there on the capital market side. Same in Guatemala, we did then turn around all of that. We're running one of the largest distribution systems in Turkey, Ulug, right now. But if you look at what is in common where we've been successful, it is that political will. And we're also running the whole electric distribution system and generation, by that matter, in Cameroon, which is more challenging because you have a questionable, commitment on the political side to the private sector, and that's where you come into challenges. So I think you can do much more also on the distribution side and electric transmission systems. We run many transmission lines in Brazil, for instance, as well, and the private sector can play a really important role there. That's for the grid. That will enabling more renewables to be installed. Another element then is clearly how to use electricity, right? And say, for instance, we own the second largest district cooling business in Dubai, and by district cooling, I mean you save more than half of the electricity used to cool down buildings rather than electric, air conditioning units. And units like that, and I know there have been some discussions in New Cairo, for instance, and getting that to hold district cooling, which of course we would love to do. But if you think about that, if you take down that consumption by half, that is equivalent to building many gigawatts of renewable projects. So not just looking at the renewable project, but also looking at the whole sector where it can come in.
Thank you, Torbjörn. And maybe over to Amr for his final comment on there are apparently, so if the project is bankable, the capital is not the issue. But sort of from your perspective also, and maybe also widening, given that you have such a wide scope of projects that you are investing in, so where do you see sort of the opportunities and the risk in scaling up sort of the green ambition, if you were to summarize your key observations for Egypt?
I think the overarching scheme for me is, I think all elements are there. We just need to move faster, deploy capital, close out projects, and this will only work if it's a hand-in-hand discussion with the government. I think NOEFI is a great platform that will allow these projects to be unlocked and to move forward. And it's just a matter of putting things together and closing out the projects. I don't think there's anything missing. If the funding is there, the private sector appetite is there, if the resources are there, it just needs government push and private sector engagement.
Thank you, Amr. And maybe, so I give the floor for the final time to Dr. Rania before we open the floor maybe for one question from the audience. But so maybe sort of from this discussion and sort of what are you taking away as someone who's really keen on bringing the partners together to achieve a scale up of the system?
First, that we're very proud that the platform was launched and that there are results despite a very tough regional and global macro environment. And what we want to do going forward is to capitalize on the macro stability, if you will, that or the adjustment that took place to try and expedite a lot of many of the points that were mentioned here. But again, we have currently the partnership with the EU has moved into a comprehensive and strategic partnership. And as Am mentioned, the requirements of energy there are quite big, and we provide a very good investment opportunity to be able to generate that and so forth. So there is that element. Green hydrogen also, EBRD is working with us on the green hydrogen bit, and during COP we launched together the strategy, and it's been finalized. So there are opportunities. I just want to invite everybody to take a look at the NOEFI website, the progress report, and basically see what has been achieved. But there's much more that needs to be done, and we're committed to doing that.
Thank you so much. So maybe I will first of all want to really a big thank you and maybe a round of applause from the audience for our amazing panel. Thank you all. I think this has really been a very constructive, forward-looking discussion on sort of how we can, iron out some of the kinks, scale up, accelerate energy transition if, the key elements are all coming together. But I also wanted to see if there's any questions from the audience. And I see a gentleman over there. We have a microphone. If you could introduce yourself and then ask the question.
Hello, I'm Sukhwasa from Mongolia. I'm operating a wind farm. I have a question from Harry. And we financed our project from EBRD as well as FMO, a syndication loan. But meanwhile, the local banks is growing in Mongolia. And how about this EBRD policy to syndicate loans with local banks? Is this possible? Because we would extend our wind farm as well as we can build another new project. And can you make some joint financing with Mongolian local banks within EBRD? What is the next future of EBRD's policy?
Thank you so much. And maybe sort of another not so well-kept secret, of course, one of Harry's past endeavors was financing wind farms in Mongolia. So this is a very fitting question. But I think it is also a more broader picture when we talked about the financing gap for renewables. That's also, of course, relevant not just to Egypt, but also Mongolia and how we bring some of the commercial and private sector banks in. But over to you, Harry.
So Mr. Sokpata has been asking me difficult questions for 15 years, and he's not about to stop now. So going back to the scale of the challenge, you can't meet that 2.4 trillion just with foreign money. If you do, you would, the IMF would have a heart attack on the spot. You would create major imbalances. And you would create an enormous currency issue for the countries doing that. So you've got to meet as much as possible as you can with domestic capital. And these are domestic assets financed typically with domestic revenues or paid for with domestic revenues. So of course it makes sense to finance them with domestic capital. And that's why, for EBRD and indeed for all development banks, supporting the development of local financial capital, whether it's capital markets or banks, is really, really important. It's one of our key policy priorities. It is also very challenging because in many environments you don't have a local market which can deliver the long-term financing. So the simple answer to the question is we would love to partner with local banks. In many cases, local banks simply aren't able to provide the 18, 20-year money and the fixed rates and the competitive rates that those projects need in order to be affordable. But wherever they are, then absolutely we'd be delighted. And provided you leave a little piece for us in the South extension, that certainly applies to Mongolia.
Thank you. One more question.
Thank you. I just wanted to compliment the panel and Dr. Rania for your leadership in solar and EBRD for funding these projects. I'm Craig O'Connor, International Business Development with NextTracker. On that video, you saw those posts. Those were supplied by NextTracker. We supplied 325 megawatts for the Binban solar project, and we want to do more in Egypt. What does 5 years from now look like? Because we are definitely committed to Egypt, so thank you for that again.
Thank you so much. I think this is probably actually a perfect closing comment because unfortunately we have to wrap this panel up. But I think thank you also, and very good to highlight that you're also featured in the video and that there's so many components also on the industrial base to accelerate the green transition. Another big thanks to the panel, to my amazing speakers. Thank you to the audience. It was a great pleasure to be here, and let's know our feet together.